Hello and welcome to the Module 2 of our Biochemistry for Medical Laboratory Science. For today's lecture, we will be dealing with the relationship of cell biology and biochemistry, focusing on your water and pH. For the outline of the topics for today's lecture, we will be dealing with carbon, water, acid bases and buffer, and lastly, your living cells. The chemistry of living organism is organized around carbon, which accounts for more than half the dry weights of cell. Your carbon is an abundant element in our body. It has 4 binding sites for other atoms, which makes it the key atom for organic chemistry. So, recall lang ng differentiation between organic and inorganic chemistry. For organic chemistry, we're commonly dealing with compounds that contain carbon. In comparison to inorganic chemistry, we're commonly dealing with compounds that do not contain your carbon. Carbon is capable of forming stable bonds to a number of other elements. Please take note, those include the biochemically important elements such as your hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, and sulfur. Carbon is the primary component of macromolecules, including your proteins, lipids, nucleic acids, and carbohydrates. So kung matatandaan, yung mga principal biomolecules in biochemistry, lahat sila merong carbon in their chemical structure. The carbon accounts for at least 18% in our human body. Next is your water. It is the predominant chemical component of a living organism. It forms an essential part of body cell and body fluids. Also, pakitandaan ng ating keyword, pag sinabing universal solvent, it refers to your water. Okay, kahit saan ka naman magpunta ang water, universal solvent, kalagay natin yan. Also, your water is the medium in intra and extracellular processes happening inside and outside of your cell. So, yung pinaka-vessel ng mga ibang solid doon, or yung medium, yun yung ating water. Its dipolar nature with positive and negative ends allows it to form hydrogen bonds, which is responsible for its solvent property. It can act as hydrogen donor and hydrogen acceptor simultaneously. Since there's a separation of charge, this type of covalent bond is a polar bond. Human body consists of 62% of water. So as you can see on your screen, ito mga information na hindi naman natin kailangan kabisaduhin. Mga nice to know lang to. We will focus on the more important information for biochemistry. The total amount of body water is constant. Only the tissue concentration varies. Again, do not forget, yung total body water daw natin, constant yun. Nag-iiba-iba na lang yung concentration depending on the tissue. The distribution of water in lean average male and female. For the male, 40% solids and 60% fluid. For the female, 45% solid and then 55% fluid. And then ito yung amount ng ating total body water. So hindi naman po kailangan kabisaduhin. Nice to know lang yan. And then the total amount of the body water accounts for at least 45 to 80%. The water content is dependent on your body weight, age, sex, and then the amount of fat. The younger the patient, the higher the water content. Obese persons have less water content, and then the females have less water content. So, Ma'am Trina, bakit naman po nagkaiba pa yung water content ng female sa male? Yung obese sa mga thin persons, bakit magkaiba pa sila? Okay, so babalikan lang natin ang ating anatomy and physiology. It is said that fat tissue has lower percentage of water than lean tissue compared sa mga lean tissue. Ano ba yung mga lean tissue? Yun yung mga wala masyadong fat. Okay? So kung mapapansin nyo, yung mga girls, mas marami tayong fat compared sa mga boys. So pakikapa yung mga braso tsaka yung mga legs, mas meron tayong fat compared sa mga guys. Sila puro mga muscle, puro laman. Okay? Paano po nangyari yon? Studies show that women tend to have fat because we have estrogen. Okay? Yung mga guys, wala naman sila nun eh. And then the estrogen, it reduces the women's ability to burn energy after eating, resulting in more fat being stored in our body. So, kasalanan pala ni estrogen yon. So, ang rationale dyan, the higher the fat content, the lower the percentage of water in your body. Kaya pala. So, sa female, mas marami tayong fat dahil sa estrogen, mas mataas yung fat content natin, mas mababa yung water content natin. Same as for the obese persons. Mas mataas kasi yung fat content ng obese persons compared sa mga thin people. And then, mas mababa din talaga yung kanilang water content in their body. Next, in general, the half-life of our water is 9.3 days, and then the fluctuation is less than 1% of body weight per day. Next, for our cell membrane, meron tayong tinatawag na transport of molecules or transport of other ions. And with that, we have two types of your transport, naming your passive and then your active transport. Okay? And then for the passive transport, we have two types or two examples, naming your simple and then your facilitated diffusion. So again, in our cell membrane, we have transport of chemicals or molecules kung saan nakakadaan sila sa ating cell membrane. And then we have two types for that, naming your passive transport and then your active transport. So passive transport, meron tayong two types or two examples, naming your simple and facilitated diffusion po ang tawag doon. So going back lang sa ating cell membrane, if we will look closely, it is comprised of a phospholipid bilayer. Okay, bilayer, dalawang layers po siya. And then, if you will look closely, meron siyang head and then merong tail yung ating phospholipid. Tingnan natin on our right side. Itong head na to, it is a polar head. Okay, it is comprised of phosphate and glycerol and then it is a polar head. And then yung pinaka-tail, which is a fatty acid, it is a non-polar tail. Okay, pakitandaan po. With that being said, for your simple diffusion, there is a net movement from a region of a high concentration to a region of low concentration. And neither energy nor a carrier protein is required for the diffusion. Ibig sabihin, ang ating cell membrane, hindi lahat ng molecules or hindi lahat ng mga ions, they can pass freely sa ating cell membrane. Kasi nga, ang ating head, polar head, di ba, meron siyang positive and then negative charges na binabantayan sa outside. And then dun sa loob naman, meron din siyang mga positive and then negative charges na binabantayan. So hindi lahat ng compounds or hindi lahat ng molecules can pass freely. Okay, ano lang ba yung mga molecules na pwedeng mag-pass freely doon sa ating phospholipid bilayer? And by the way, our cell membrane, it is a semi-permeable membrane. So meaning, hindi nga lahat ng molecules can pass freely. Ano lang ba yung mga molecules na pwedeng dumaan dun sa ating phospholipid bilayer freely? Okay, ito po sila. Yung mga oxygen, carbon dioxide, and then your steroid hormones. They can pass through our cell membrane through simple diffusion. Okay, from a high concentration to a region of low concentration. So tignan natin sa picture natin on our right side. Okay, sa labas kasi ng ating cell membrane, may high concentration of particles. So, nakadaan lang sila freely to reach our equilibrium sa loob ng ating cell. Okay, wala namang ATP required. Another example of simple diffusion is your gas exchange. Okay, sa ating lungs, meron tayong mga millions of alveoli dyan. And then, the alveoli will diffuse the oxygen going to your blood. Okay, walang ATP na required, adenosine triphosphate, walang energy required. And then, yung blood mo naman, your RBC, can diffuse freely the carbon dioxide going to your lungs. Okay, yun po yung ating simple diffusion. Next, another type of your passive transport is your facilitated diffusion. It requires that the transported molecule bind to a specific carrier or transport protein in the membrane. So, yun yung difference nila ni simple diffusion. Hindi kailangan ni simple diffusion ng carrier para makapag-pass through yung mga molecules sa loob ng ating cell membrane. Dito sa facilitated, kailangan po niya. Ano ba yung mga molecules that needs carrier proteins para makapag-pass through sa ating cell membrane? Sila water, sila glucose, and then sila ion. Please take note pa din na walang ATP required dito sa ating facilitated diffusion, and it is an example of our passive transport. Next is your active transport. The features of your active transport are, this form of transport requires energy. Okay, kailangan na po natin ng ATP dito. About 40% of the total energy expenditure in a cell is used for the active transport system. The active transport is unidirectional, and then it requires specialized integral proteins called your transporters. And then the transport system is saturated at higher concentrations of the solute. So dito kailangan na natin ng mga transporters. Ano ba yung mga example ng ating active transport? Yun na po yung ating mga sodium and potassium exchange sa loob ng ating cell. So, okay. Next, for your acids and your bases. Okay, review lang to ng ating analytical chemistry. For acids and bases, according to Bronsted-Lowry theory, yung hydrogen ion mo daw, kapag ka nag-donate yun, sino po yung mga yun? Sila po si acid. Okay, tama? Substances that donate protons in solution, they are your acid. And then yung mga substance naman na nag-a-accept ng proton or your hydrogen ion, they are your bases. And then example ng ating mga acid, yung hydrochloric acid, yung sulfuric acid, and then your bicarbonate. Okay? Or your carbonic acid, sorry. Carbonic acid. And then example naman ng ating base are your bicarbonate. And then, ang ating acid, it is categorized into two. Your strong hydrochloric acid and then your weak carbonic. Ang example nun, carbonic acid. Okay, yung base naman, nakakategorize naman siya sa strong and then sa weak. Example ng ating mga strong bases are your sodium hydroxide. Weak base naman natin si bicarbonate ion. Okay, naka-highlight po itong dalawa kasi sa ating acid-base physiology sa katawan, sila yung ginagamit. Tsaka sa buffer system natin. Si carbonic acid as well as your bicarbonate ion. So, later on, madidiscuss natin siya. So, refresh lang natin sa ating mga isipan, si ionization is a process in which individual positive and negative ions are produced from a molecular compound that is dissolved in your solution. Okay, mag-iiba lang kung strong or weak. Sa acid mo, meron kang strong and weak. Sa base mo, merong strong base, merong weak base. Pag mga acids, sabi nga natin, these are the substances that donate protons or your hydrogen ion in the solution. Mga strong acids, acid natin, they ionize completely into component or nagdi-dissociate, naghihiwalay sila completely kapag ka nadagdagan sila ng water. Okay, they are markedly lower pH. For example, yung hydrochloric acid natin, strong acid yan. Okay, pag nadagdagan siya ng water, nag-dissociate completely, naghiwalay, naging hydrogen and then chlorine na. Conjugate acid and then your conjugate base. Okay, in contrast to weak acid, hindi sila nag-dissociate or nag-ionize completely. Yung weak acid natin, they ionize weakly or slightly or partially or less completely. You can observe small changes in the pH. Example natin dyan, ang ating carbonic acid. Weak acid po yung mga yan. Okay, nung nadagdagan ng water, hindi sila naghiwalay completely. Pansinin nyo, may hydrogen ka pa dyan. And then dito may bicarbonate ka pa. Okay, next for your bases, these are the substances that accepts your proton or your hydrogen in solution. Mga strong bases natin, they ionize completely into component ions. They markedly raise the pH. Okay, nagdi-dissociate completely, naghihiwalay completely. Example natin dyan ng ating mga sodium hydroxide. Kapag ka nadagdagan ng water, naghiwalay completely. Naging sodium niya, naging hydroxide na. Next, weak bases naman, they ionize weakly or slightly or partially or less completely. You can observe small changes in your pH. Example natin dyan ng ating mga weak bases are your ammonium hydroxide. Okay? Nung nadagdagan ng water, hindi sila nag-dissociate completely. NH3 lang and then OH lang. Okay? Ito po ang ating mga acids and bases that are significant in our body as well. Okay? So, balikan natin si buffer. Pero before tayo mag-head-on kay buffer, kailangan nating kabisaduhin po ito, ha? Si pH of the blood. Alam ko naman na sa puso niyo na to. Okay? Buffer, it consists of solutions of acid-base conjugate pairs. Do not forget, buffer, it is consists of solutions of acid-base conjugate pairs. Again, your buffer is an aqueous solution containing substances that prevent major changes in a solution pH when a small amount of acid or base are added to it. It maintains a particular pH when added to the solution, and yung ating keyword, it resists changes in the pH when H or your OH is added. For example, meron kang beaker, and then meron kang solution dyan. Meron kang acidic solution, acidic pH, that contains 4.0. Okay? Kung gusto mo siyang dagdagan ng isang basic solution that has a pH of 8.0, para hindi masyadong mabago yung pH mo dito, hindi ka maka-observe ng drastic change, hindi masyadong magalaw yung 4.0, kailangan natin ng buffer. Okay? Parang ano siya, stabilizer, para hindi masyadong magkaroon ng changes sa ating pH. Okay? Your buffer plays a very important role in many chemical and biochemical systems. We have to take note the pH of the blood, and then our body must maintain a steady pH to avoid loss of critical biological function, and then it must be maintained at 7.35 to 7.45. Pakikitandaan po ito. Gawa tayo ng box dyan. Okay? The pH is equals to the logarithm of 1 divided by your hydrogen ion concentration. Bakit po sinulat ni ma'am yan? Para ma-visualize natin yung correlation and then yung relationship ng pH mo and then yung hydrogen ion mo. Okay? Si hydrogen ion and then si pH, inversely related sila. So, ibig sabihin, pag tumataas yung hydrogen ion, bumababa yung pH. Okay? Pag bumababa yung hydrogen ion mo, tumataas naman yung pH mo. Okay? Kahit po hindi natin kabisaduhin yung formula, basta naiintindihan natin yung mechanism ng ating hydrogen ion and then the pH. Kasi ang hydrogen ion, they reduces the pH. Okay? Pinapababa niya yung pH mo. So, the more na mas mataas yung hydrogen ion mo, mas bumababa yung pH mo. Pag naman mababa yung hydrogen ion mo, tataas yung pH mo. So, we must maintain the pH of the blood around 7.35 to 7.45. If the pH of the blood became lower or less than 7.35, meron ka ng acidosis. Okay? Kapag ka naman condition of acidity in the blood, acidemia yung tawag doon. In the blood yan, ha? Pagka naman ang pH mo is greater than 7.45, meron kang alkalosis. Okay? Kapag mataas yung alkaline sa blood, alkalemia. Alkalemia. Okay? Please take note. Next, going to your Henderson-Hasselbalch equation. Alam ko, familiar na kayo dyan. Pero ano ba talaga ang relevance ni Henderson-Hasselbalch equation sa ating mga buhay? So, pakitandaan yung formula kasi gagamitin natin to hanggang sa clinical chemistry ninyo. Okay? Pakikabisado na po. Henderson-Hasselbalch can be used to estimate the pH of a buffer solution. It can also be used to detect any problem in the pH homeostasis, and then it can be used for arterial blood gas. Ma'am, para saan po ba yung ABG or arterial blood gas? It is the test that is used to measure the acidity of the blood pH. And then it can measure the oxygen and carbon dioxide from your artery. So, you must maintain the pH of the blood around 7.35 to 7.45. I cannot stress that enough kasi madami tayong complications na pwedeng ma-experience or we can suffer from these following complications kapag hindi natin na-maintain yung pH na ng blood natin. Okay, madami tayong mga acid-base imbalance diseases na pwede nating ma-experience. Okay, going back to your Henderson-Hasselbalch equation, pH is equals to the ionization constant plus log times your conjugate base divided by your weak acid. Pakitandaan na po ang ating formula. So to give you a sample problem, what is the pH of a buffer solution that is 0.6 molar in acetic acid and 1.5 in sodium acetate? The pKa for your acetic acid is 4.74. So the first step is to write the given. And then identify mo alin dun si weak acid and then identify mo si conjugate base kasi si pKa given naman na siya. Okay, nasulat mo na yung given. Apply lang natin siya and substitute sa ating formula. Solution will be pH is equals to the 4.74 plus the logarithm of your 1.5 molar divided by 0.6 molar. Next, pH is equals to the 4.74 plus the logarithm of your 2.5. Saan po galing yung 2.5, ma'am? Dinivide lang natin itong 1.5 tsaka 0.6. Next naman, pH pa din is equals to 4.74 plus, i-press mo na sa calculator mo what is the logarithm of your 2.5. Okay, click mo lang yung shift log 2.5. And then the answer is 0.3979. And then add mo lang silang dalawa. Ang final answer natin is 5.14. The pH of that buffer solution is around 5.14, which can be categorized as acidic. Next, ito po yung mga binabanggit kong complications kanina pa pag hindi talaga natin na-maintain ang ating acid-base balance. Okay? Enzymes. Enzymes as protein molecules cannot function effectively and optimally at extremes of pH or values beyond and below the narrow pH of your 7.35 and 7.45. We have to remember that enzymes are proteins. Okay? And then kapag ka sinubject mo siya sa change in the pH around its surrounding, it will also change the shape of its active site. Okay? Remember, ang ating enzyme meron siyang active site and then meron siyang binding site. So kapag ka nag-change na yung shape ng active site, hindi na makakapag-function regularly ang ating enzyme. Imagine, hindi nagpa-function yung enzyme mo inside your body. So that will be detrimental. Next, remember that your enzymes are protein nga po, and then they have amino acid. And then if you will subject the enzyme to change in the pH, it will affect the amino acid structure. Remember, your amino acid, meron siyang positive and negative charge. Okay? Yung mga dapat mag-bind kay positive and negative charge for your enzyme, hindi na sila magbabind. So, apektado talaga si enzyme. Hindi na siya makakapag-work regularly. Hindi na niya magagawa yung trabaho niya inside your body. Next, the metabolic and physiologic body processes cannot proceed. There will be no ATP generation. Imagine, pag walang ATP generation, it can lead to weakness, lethargy, coma, and even death. Okay? If the pH in the blood will shift towards acidity, ito yung mga may experience mo. The pH of 7.3, it will have rapid breathing. The patient will have fatigue, nausea, abdominal pain, rapid pulse, and breathing kapag 7.2 yung pH niya. A pH of 7.1, the BP will fall due to the decreased force of heartbeat, arterial vasodilation, and then irregular pulse. The pH of 7.0, decreased consciousness, and then a pH of 6.8 is incompatible with life. Okay? If the pH of the blood will shift towards alkalinity, for example, 7.5, the patient will experience slow breathing. And then 7.6, muscle cramps, fatigue, irregular heartbeat. 7.7, seizures and tetany. And lastly, 7.8, it is incompatible in life na. Next, ito na yung mga buffer system natin. Okay, ito na yung mag-act upon our blood so that we will not experience those acid to base imbalance. Okay? Number 1. Meron tayong tatlong types of buffer system. Number 1 doon si circulatory system or your chemical buffers. Pakitandaan po, these are the most important buffer system in the plasma, your bicarbonate buffer. So how does it work? Paano po yan nag-work, ma'am? Okay, for example, meron tayo ditong carbonic acid. Carbonic acid is categorized as weak acid. Okay? And then, kapag ka nadagdagan ng water, according to our ionization principle, it will become a conjugate base and then meron ka ng hydronium ion dito. Okay, so tingnan naman natin yung equation natin sa baba. Ang sabi daw po sa ating circulatory system chemical buffers, once yung inyong bicarbonate, okay, na-introduce yung inyong acidic substance, which is yung hydronium ion. Ayan, pangit ang sulat ko. It will neutralize to become carbonic acid and then water. Okay, so hindi na siya magiging acidic. Yung blood pH mo hindi na magiging acidic. Ayun yung trabaho ng buffer mo. Okay, nag-act up na yung HCO3 mo dito. Next naman, for the carbonic acid, once nakapag-introduce ng basic substance na katawan mo, merong na-ingest na basic substance, for example. And then, ang trabaho nun, H2CO3 plus your hydroxyl ion, it will neutralize, it will dissociate, and then it will become your bicarbonate and then your water. Okay? So, ang trabaho talaga ni buffer is to neutralize those acidic and then basic pH para hindi maapektuhan yung ating blood. Next, under pa rin ang ating circulatory or chemical buffers, non-bicarbonate buffers, your phosphate buffer that acts upon your RBCs and all types of cell. Hindi na natin yan i-discuss much further. Mas maganda lang na daanan natin siya. Your hemoglobin buffer, it acts upon your RBC. Pakitandaan po ang hemoglobin buffer. Dumidikit po din ng mga ating hydrogen ion. Okay, hindi maganda sa ating katawan si hydrogen ion. So lahat ng mga buffer, ginagawa nila yung paraan nila para mag-bind sa kanila yung mga hydronium ion and hydrogen ion natin, as well as your hydroxyl ion. Next, your protein buffers, it acts upon your intracellular fluid and then your plasma. Okay, remember your protein buffers, tingnan natin ang ating amino acid structure here. Meron tayong amino group, meron din tayong carboxyl group. Ano po ang charge ng ating amino group? Meron tayong positive charge dyan. Okay, ang carboxyl group, negatively charged yan. So, ang trabaho ng mga amino acid natin as protein buffers, sila yung mga charge regions natin that they can bind your hydrogen ion and your hydroxyl ion para ma-excrete na natin sila sa katawan at hindi sila magstay sa ating bloodstream. So, yun yung trabaho ng ating protein buffers. Next buffer system is the respiratory system that works on your expiration. Okay? Pakitingnan sa ating illustration. Pag meron kang carbon dioxide, it is the byproduct. Usually, madami talaga tayong acid sa katawan. Kasi po, maraming mga metabolism na nangyayari sa katawan natin. Okay? Itong CO2, it is a product of your cellular metabolism. Kapag nadagdagan siya ng water, okay, ang product niya is your H2CO3 or your carbonic acid. Okay po? Again, your CO2 plus H2O, ang product niya is yung H2CO3 mo, which is your carbonic acid. And then, kailangan matanggal ang kanyang hydrogen ion. Kasi hindi nga maganda si hydrogen ion sa katawan. So, upon dissociation or your ionization, mawawala yung hydrogen ion dyan. Magiging bicarbonate ion na lang siya, or your HCO3, bicarb ion. Okay? And then the bicarb ion will be regulated by the kidney. So, kung babalik lang natin ang ating equation, yung HCO3 plus hydrogen, magiging H2CO3 siya, pabalik siya hanggang sa maging carbon dioxide na pwede na siyang i-excrete ng lungs. Okay, again, CO2 plus H2O, ang product niya magiging H2CO3, and then the goal is to remove the hydrogen ion, and then ang iyong HCO3 or your bicarb ion will be used or regulated by the kidney. Okay, so kung bumalik na siya dito, naging HCO3 na ulit siya, and then madadagdagan ulit siya ng iyong hydronium ion, magiging H2CO3 na siya, it will then be excreted by your lungs. Next, for the renal system, excretion pa rin ng hydronium ion. Galit talaga tayo sa hydronium ion. And then the excretion of our bicarbonate. Next, the general acid-base overview. The acid-base homeostasis requires the integration of three organ systems, naming your liver, the lungs, and then the kidney. The liver, it metabolizes protein that produces hydrogen. Your lungs, it removes and retains your carbon dioxide. The extra carbon dioxide will combine with the water to form your carbonic acid. Okay? Ito po siya. Diba? Yung carbon dioxide mo plus water, it will form to carbonic acid. So, hindi na makita. Nakovera na siya. Next, the H2 reflecting the bicarbonate role as an extracellular buffer. Itong kidneys natin, meron siyang two main purposes in the regulation of the acid-base balance. Okay, mas maganda kung i-discuss natin siya thoroughly sa next topic, pero I think this was discussed on your anatomy and physiology. It regulates the plasma bicarbonate by reabsorbing the filtered bicarbonate through recycling, and then it affects the hydrogen ion excretion through the formation of titrable acids and ammonium synthesis. So, dapat ito talaga mga hydronium ion na to, hydrogen ion na to, ma-excrete natin to. And then for your bicarbonate carbonic acid buffer system, what happens when you accidentally ingested your hydrochloric acid? Hydrochloric acid naturally present siya sa ating digestive system. But what will happen if you accidentally ingest? Okay, tingnan natin sa ating equation. Your hydrochloric acid is a strong acid. Pag dinagdagan mo siya ng salt, it will dissociate. And then it will become a weak acid and then the salt. Okay, it is the bicarbonate component that buffers your hydrochloric acid to form your weak acid, which is your H2CO3. Hence, a buffer converts a strong acid into a weak acid with no drastic change in the pH. Next, what will happen when you accidentally ingested your sodium hydroxide? Tingnan natin sa ating equation. Your sodium hydroxide, ano po ba siya? Strong base. Okay, when added with your weak acid, tingnan natin sa ionization, dissociation, it will become a weak base and then your water. It is the weak acid component that buffers hydrochloric acid to form the weak base of your NaHCO3. Hence, a buffer converts a strong base into a weak base with no drastic change in the pH. Okay, paki-take note po, naka-yellow, there is a limit to which your buffers will work. Depends on how much stress was given to the buffer. So, hindi naman po ibig sabihin sinabi ni ma'am na there will be no drastic change in the pH. Iinom ka na ng sodium hydroxide at hydrochloric acid intentionally. So, ito lang for educational purposes lang. What if lang naman. Okay? Kasi ang ating mga buffer, it will only work depending on how much stress that was given. Baka sobrang stress na niyang buffer mo, so sobrang dami mong ininom ng hydrochloric acid, toxic pa rin po yun sa ating katawan. Okay, wag pong gagawin yun. Next, for your living cells, last topic na natin to. The cells is the basic unit of life. All organisms are composed of cells. All living cells that are made up of cells. All living things are made up of cells. New cells arise only from pre-existing cell bounded by selectively permeable membrane. Okay, ito na naman po tayo. Kasi tatlo po yung parts ng ating cell. Meron tayong plasma membrane or cell membrane. Meron tayong nucleus dyan. And then meron tayong cytoplasm. Okay, doon nakalagay yung mga organelles natin. We have two types of cell, namely your eukaryotes and then your prokaryotes. Prokaryotic cell, usually mga bacteria lang sila. Eukaryotic, tayo yung mga yon. Kasama yung mga animals, plants, fungi, and then the protists. Ito yung mga differences ng prokaryotes natin and then our eukaryotes. So, hindi na natin kailangan kabisaduhin. Bilugan lang natin yung mga importante. Importante po dyan ang ating flagella. It consists of two protein building blocks. Mga prokaryotes, may mga flagella, yung mga bacteria. And then sa eukaryotes naman, complex. It consists of multiple microtubules. For the cell wall, importante din po yan. For the prokaryotes, usually present and then chemically complex. For the eukaryotes, when present, chemically simple lang. Ano pa ba? Cell division, importante din yan. Sa prokaryotes, binary fission. Sa ating mga eukaryotes, mitosis ang ating cell division. What else? Yun lang naman. Okay? Cytoplasm, it is the cell or your cyto, and then the plasm is the fluid. It is a fluid-filled interior of cell. It is free-floating. It suspends cell organelles. Doon daw nakasuspend yung mga cell organelles natin. Okay, kung mapapansin. And by the way, kaya sila tinawag na organelles kasi para silang mga baby organs. Pansin nyo, meron silang kanilang function. Organelles, baby organs. Next, living substance of cell. It is rich in organic and inorganic compounds. It is the portion of the cell located between the plasma membrane and then your nucleus. And then meron tayong two types of pigments, your endogenous and then your exogenous. And then this is your nucleus. The nucleus is surrounded by nuclear envelope with nuclear pores. It contains the genetic information, which is your DNA, which exists as chromatin in non-dividing cell. It controls all the cell activity. So, siya yung tinatawag natin control center of the cell. Your nucleolus, in the center of the nucleus, nandun siya sa gitna, it produces your ribosomes. Do not forget. Next, the cell membrane or your plasma membrane, the thin layer of protein and fat that surrounds our cell. The cell membrane is semi-permeable, allowing some substances to pass into the cell and blocking others. So, yun nga po sinasabi natin kanina, hindi lahat pwedeng pumasok doon sa cell membrane. Kasi may mga masyadong malalaking molecules, hindi na sila makapasok doon. Okay? It is composed of a phospholipid bilayer. And then, it has a hydrophobic tail and then a hydrophilic head. Okay? So, sa ating mga cell membrane, may mga, cholesterol din mga dyan yan. Kasi madami tayong mga proteins, mga fats, yan. And then your chromosomes, eukaryotes, cells with nuclei such as those found in plants, yeast, and animals possess multiple large linear chromosomes contained in the cell's nucleus. In the nuclear chromosomes of the eukaryotes, the uncondensed DNA exists in a semi-ordered structure where it is wrapped around histones. Please take note that our histones are structural proteins. Proteins yung mga histones na yan, ha? Forming a composite material called your chromatin. Next, the mitochondria, or also called the powerhouse of the cell. It produces the cellular energy in the form of your adenosine triphosphate through a process called cellular respiration, and it metabolizes your glucose. Next, your ribosome, the non-membrane bound particle where protein synthesis occurs. And then it links the amino acid to form your protein. Okay, so kung matatandaan sa ating central dogma, may kinalaman si DNA sa pag-convert ng RNA na magiging protein. So, kasali po dun si ribosome. So, kung mapapansin nyo, meron tayong chain ng mRNA dito. Si ribosome, it works like a Pac-Man. So, kinakagat-kagat niya si RNA, tapos naglalabas siya ng mga amino acid which will be formed into protein. Okay? Next, your endoplasmic reticulum or your blood vessels. It is a membranous system where ribosomes attach and aid in protein synthesis. It is a network of tubes and flattened sacs that channels the flow of substances around your cytoplasm. So, saan po nakakabit ang ating ribosome? Meron tayong two types of endoplasmic reticulum. Nasaan ba siya? Nasa smooth or nasa rough? Okay, so tama yung sinagot mo, nasa rough, ER. It is a complex system of branching tubes and flattened sacs covered by ribosomes on their surface. It assists in the protein synthesis. Please take note and translation of language of your nucleic acid. Ang trabaho naman ni smooth ER, it mostly contains the enzymes that functions in your lipid synthesis. It is the side of steroid synthesis, especially steroid hormones. Example nun yung mga progesterone. Okay, so tingnan natin dito. Nandito po yung mga ribosomes sa ating rough ER. Next, your Golgi apparatus. It is a flattened stalks of membrane, collects, packages, and modifies cell materials to be used in other parts of the cell or transported out of the cell. Yung lysosome naman natin, pag sinabing lysosome, ano yung word na pumapasok sa isip natin? Yung mga suicide bags natin yan, suicide sac. Okay, it is a membrane-bound vesicles produced by the Golgi apparatus, important in recycling cellular material and food materials, and also van digesting worn-out organelle. Okay, please do not forget, i-highlight natin Saan na ba yun? Ay, ito. Okay, it secretes enzymes like hydrochloric acid to broken down nutrients and viruses, yung mga foreign materials such as bacteria and viruses. And then it is a membrane-bound organelle that contain digestive enzyme. Acid hydrolase yung example nun and act as the digestive system of the cell known as your suicide bags. Okay, so ito, mga picture lang yan ng ating cell. And ito, mas maganda yung representation ng ating cell in this picture. Kitang-kita mga organelles natin. And lastly, the stages of your mitosis in the cell division. From interphase, prophase, inlay prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase, and then your cytokinesis or your daughter cells. Okay, hindi na natin ito i-discuss on our biochemistry as I believe this will be discussed much further on your cytogenetics. Ang mahalaga, alam natin na ang kanyang product o yung end stage ng ating mitosis is the cytokinesis or your daughter cells. Okay, thank you and God bless.